This podcast is going to look at food, history, art and design, and look at how, why and where they intersect, and the impact that they've had and continue to have on our culture and experiences. Welcome to the Smye Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Emmeline Smye. This episode is all about gooseberries. Those little berries that at first glance may be mistaken for a grape, but on closer inspection, they're rounder in shape, tarter in taste, and overall more seasonally elusive. They come in green, rose, and red and white and yellow varieties. Most, but not all varieties, have a charming hairy bristle on their skin. Picking gooseberries can be precarious due to the prickly thorns on the bushes they grow upon. It's well worth all the effort, and they provide a tart, crisp flavour, enhanced by the ever so small, little crunchy seeds held within, making them delicious when added to pies, crumbles, fools, jam, chutney, cordials, jellies, pickles, and even wine. Some say they were brought here by the Romans, while some say they are native to Europe, large parts of Asia, and northern Africa, whilst some say that determining if they arrived in Britain as cultivars or they are indeed native is indistinguishable and impossible to tell. We owe a lot to our hunter-gatherer past, and gooseberries could be gathered from the hedgerows that their bushes grow within. They appear in 16th century cookbooks as being good in many of the ways that we're still enjoying them today: pureed, boiled and juiced, served alongside meat, fish, or as a sweet dish. One way we've been enjoying gooseberries is the classic dish of gooseberry fool. The 1658 cookbook, which is a bit of a mouthful, the complete cook, expertly prescribing the most ready ways, whether Italian, Spanish or French, for dressing of flesh and fish, ordering of sauces, or making of pastry. This was compiled by a W.M., of whom we know very little about, and the complete cook was part of the Queen's Closet Opened, which were manuscripts on medicine, cookery and confectionery, all three of which were especially interlinked at the time. It states, "To make a gooseberry fool, take your gooseberries and put them in a silver or earthen pot, and set it in a skillet of boiling water, and when they are coddled enough, strain them. Then make them hot again. When they are scalding hot, beat them very well with a good piece of fresh butter, rose water and sugar, and put in the yolk of 2 or 3 eggs, and so stir it all together, and serve it to the table when it is cold." This is the basis of fool, which you're mixing together with a cream or sweetened cream or custardy base. When looking at the etymology of the word gooseberry, it may just appear to be a simple compound word of goose and berry. There are some stories that say they get their name from being a berry that is often found in tandem with geese, as well as served as a culinary accompaniment alongside it. They are also associated with mackerel, and the French for gooseberries is groseille maquereau. It is easy to also see the connection to the German word for gooseberry, Krausbeer, and the Dutch, Kruisbers. Even within the UK, there are local terms for gooseberries, with them being known in the Middle Ages as fayberries, or more specifically, deeberries in Devon, goosegogs in Sussex, or my personal favourite from Scotland, honeyblobs. Gooseberries also have associations with legends and slang. For example, they were known in the Middle Ages as fayberries because it was thought that fairies would seek shelter and safety within their prickly bushes. In the early 18th century, a gooseberry could mean a fool. In the late 18th century, the old gooseberry meant the devil. In the 19th century, a gooseberry bush was cheeky slang for hair down there, as well as a place where you might find babies, a bit like the stork bringing them in more recent times. It has also been used as a term for a chaperone, and similarly to play gooseberry, means to be a third wheel or a surplus member of a group where one's attendance is not required, wanted, or necessarily necessary. It has also been used to mean a trick, a hoax, or a long-winded, possibly untrue story. Then there's the classic usage to mean testicles, as in, the ball bounced up and got him right in the gooseberries. My handy 18th century reference book, Meals Medicinal, says that gooseberry juice will cure all inflammations. It also makes a case that since gooseberries are so acid, they make a perfect corrective to, quote, putrescent foods such as mackerel or goose, end quote. Gooseberries are a good source of vitamin C, and they have a really high water content. By the 19th century, gooseberries were at their height of popularity, and gardeners competed for recognition that their particular varieties of gooseberries were best. This tradition still goes on, and the Egton Bridge Gooseberry Society have been weighing, measuring, and celebrating the gooseberry for over 200 years in their annual horticultural and competitive Egton Bridge Gooseberry Show. You can check out their website on egtongooseberryshow.org.uk, which is a wealth of history, knowledge, and passion that many of its members enjoy as their descendants did before them. In fact, it is Egton Bridge Gooseberry Society treasurer and member Brian Nellist who owns the world record for heaviest gooseberry, which he has held since 2009, with a gooseberry weighing in at 35 drams. A dram being a unit of mass in the avoirdupois system, and both a unit of mass and a unit of volume in the apothecary system. That's roughly 62 grams, and from looking at the photos on the website, that's one gigantic gooseberry. There are many historical ledgers and menus that note gooseberry pie and gooseberry fool as the perfect end to a luncheon. Gooseberries are one of the fruits that newspaper articles lament to be in danger of disappearing from our farms and hence shop shelves due to lower demand and their cost-effectiveness to farmers. They have always been found more readily in the countryside, and now people are giving it a go and growing bushes in their gardens, and they are found in many supermarket shops and farmer markets or pick-your-own fruit farms. Be wary of those prickly bushes. I believe these things to go in cycles, and getting a ribbon or prize for the best gooseberry is no different to the current trend of people on the lookout for the latest seasonal or unusual offering that they can photograph and serve up to their guests that will be hashtag and Instagram worthy. I'm guilty of this myself. One place where they're still unusual and only recently legal, and even then only in some states, is America, where currants and gooseberries were banned from being grown due to their propensity to white pine blister rust disease, which attacks pine trees. The ban was lifted in the 1960s, but only in some areas and some states. When I lived in America and would come back to visit the UK, I couldn't get enough of blackcurrant cordial, which I never understood why it just did not seem to exist in the US. But this is why. The Rebus's bad reputation means it's still elusive in the US, but they're slowly being experimented with and discovered for their many varieties and varied usage. In reality, never has there been such a great change to the way we eat and our diets as that of the Industrial Revolution, and more specifically for the UK, the Enclosures Act. From the 6th century to the 18th century, farming technology hadn't changed much, and the lifestyles and diets of farm workers also remained largely the same, with cattle and livestock being fed through spring, summer and autumn and slaughtered at winter. The Industrial Revolution saw developments in tools and techniques that enabled animals to be kept alive through the winter, which allowed them to be bred for size and hardiness. In the late 17th century, the Norfolk four-course system had a massive impact on farming technology. It introduced a 4-year cycle, with year 1 being wheat, year 2 was turnips, the 3rd year saw barley and clover and ryegrass undersown beneath the barley, which would be cut or used by cattle for grazing in the 4th year. The efficiency of this technique meant that larger fields of land were needed, which led to hedgerows being destroyed to make way for unimpeded tracts of land. In the late 18th and early 19th century, over 3 million acres of common land were seized and put in the hands of private farming estates. That's roughly the size of East Anglia. This was a massive turning point for farmhands who had traditionally kept a few animals to feed their families, working together as a community, butchering animals together, gathering items from the hedgerows, and cooking them in traditional recipes that made the most of seasonality and the connection between land and soil to food, diet, and culture. They now struggled to feed their families, whilst simultaneously meat consumption among the middle classes skyrocketed. Food culture was forever changed, and still the effects are felt today, and I believe this to be a key departure from other European cultures who maintained their charcuterie and cottage industries. We've always had them, but on a much smaller scale. But within one generation during the reign of George III, so much was lost to make way for the wealth that the Industrial Revolution was beginning to bring. In modern times, the remaining hedgerows are under further attack, as highways and building works break up the once vast network of hedgerows and bushes home to wildlife, fruits and vegetables. The first example of art relating to gooseberries is from Dutch artist Adriaen Coorte and his painting from 1700 titled English Spray of Gooseberries on a Stone Plinth. The daintiness of the gooseberries is carefully captured, as are their colour, and Coorte gives them a regal setting and treatment. it was not his only depiction of gooseberries, as in 1703 he painted still life with asparagus, a spray of gooseberries, a bowl of strawberries, and other fruit in niche. Bit of a mouthful there, and I would like to have had a mouthful of all the items in his painting. You can almost imagine these seasonal items being picked, pulled, gathered and arranged. He treats them so deftly, and you can see the light coming through the individual cells of the gooseberries. And as always, his treatment of asparagus is fittingly delicate. He went back time and time again to gooseberries and asparagus, which makes me wonder what their draw for him was. Was he drawn to their colour, luminosity, their texture? Did he simply love eating them, growing them, or have access to them? Most likely it's a bit of a all or most of the above scenario. Part of their delight and celebration is that they're all such brief seasonal produce that one must get while they can, or wait until next year to enjoy. Today, of course, one can buy strawberries all year round, but I don't advise it. This is the whole basis of preserves and capturing gluts of fruit and veg so that they could be enjoyed throughout the year, all while eliminating wastage. He kept it simple, with his scenes being arranged on stone plinths, slabs, or on and amongst some simple pottery. This set him apart from some of his other contemporaries who revelled in arrangements featuring exotic silverware, pewter, porcelain, textiles and laces. His concentration on depicting the beauty of the fruit within stock settings is reminiscent of bodega painters such as Adriaen and Coorte, both favourite artists of this podcast. Coorte lived, worked and died in Middelburg, in the southwest of the Netherlands, not getting much recognition outside of his workshop, where he painted over 80 works. He remained forgotten until the 1950s, when art historian Laurens J. Bol is credited with rediscovering Coorte to his current standing amongst other artists of the Dutch golden age of painting, including Vermeer, Frans Hals and Rembrandt. Just shy of 200 years later than Coorte, we have British artist Isabel Naftel's The Old Gooseberry Garden. It's a beautiful landscape painting of a wild garden painted in 1882, the height of the aforementioned 19th century gooseberry trend, and we see a likely gooseberry aficionado bent over as she tends to her gooseberry bushes. The painting is composed of different perspectives of lines going this way and that. There's a stone cottage that seems a bit dilapidated or at an angle to the viewer. It is functioning though, as its chimney is giving out little wisps of smoke which disappear into the air. Then there are the trees, bushes and landscape in the foreground and background, all at different slants, while the gooseberry gatherer is herself bent over, looking for the ripe and ready berries, which are most likely the same tones as those used throughout the composition of the painting, varying degrees of pink and green. I've struggled to find out more about Naftel beyond that she was born Isabel Oakley, daughter of the artist Octavius Oakley, and that she later became the second wife of artist Paul Jacob Naftel, and that she exhibited 4 works at the RA, and that her daughter Maud Naftel went on to be a well-known and considered artist, and the author of the book Flowers and How to Paint Them. A more contemporary rendering of gooseberries comes from contemporary Indigenous Australian artist Kerry Madawyn McCarthy. She's the daughter of an Irish father and an Indigenous mother. Kerry was brought up in the Daly River community, learning both the ways of non-Indigenous society and respect and understanding for the Indigenous traditions of the bush. Kerry started to paint in 1994 and initially created work which focused on animals and plants, painted in the traditional style of the area, as seen in Kerry's painting Gooseberries, where they appear to be at a cellular level, delicate rows of gooseberries which appear to be drifting and floating in the ether of the canvas. After further study, Kerry's style has changed to subjects associated with Indigenous tradition, influenced by her grandfather and 2 years spent in the bush at her mother's home country in Bulgul. Kerry is a gifted colourist, precise in her work and continually exploring new means of expression of her stories of life and tradition in the top end. It is beyond archetypal, as Aboriginal culture is the longest continuous culture on our planet, and the long history of storytelling is permeating within their artwork and symbolism within. This year I was honoured to be asked to give a food demonstration held at Jimmy's Farm in Ipswich and the Woodford Beer Tent, and it's a real celebration of food and music with loads of interesting events for everyone, with a very family-friendly vibe. It was such a lovely event, full of happy attendees, and I can't thank the staff and crew of Jimmy's Farm enough for asking me to take part in this stellar event. For my food demo at Jimmy's Festival, I chose a preserve that I stumbled onto not long after I started making my own flavours. It's called Plum Gumbo, and I found it in an old preserves cookbook, and since then I've seen it in several cookbooks from the 19th century. What originally caught my eye was the term gumbo, and at the time when I first saw it, I had recently been living in New Orleans, where gumbo is celebrated in song, art, and festivals. It's one of my favourite types of dishes in that everyone makes their own variation on it, and the success of the whole dish relies on the almighty roux base, which gives the gumbo its rich brown colour and flavour. It's likely that the gumbo term was applied to the plum gumbo recipe, since it too has a deep rich colour and lots of layers of flavour. For my demonstration, I made a gooseberry gumbo, and you can substitute any tart fruit in its place for gooseberries. You can find the recipe on the blog piece which accompanies this podcast episode on smygoodness.com. Essentially, it's a compote, and I love it because it works both sweet and savoury. Prefer to make compotes as they have a runnier set, and you can use much less sugar than a traditional jam. It has the fruit and zest of lemon and orange with roughly chopped sultanas to give it a depth of flavour and thickness, and chopped walnuts to give it hits of texture and nuttiness. I like to have a spoonful of it in natural yogurt, and I love it with roast duck or pork, where the citrus flavours and the nuttiness really bring out the richness of the meat. It went down a treat when served with meringues, goat's cheese, pastry cases, oat cakes, and served warm with some pulled pork. Special thanks to Joe Hurd and Hardeep Singh Kohli, who co-hosted my demonstration. Joe is a TV presenter and cook, and he did such a marvellous job. And special thanks to Hardeep Singh Kohli, broadcaster, public speaker, author, chef, journalist, and very good friend. Here's just a few snippets. So, as I mentioned, this works sweet or savoury. So, again, you can have this as an accompaniment to meat. You can even put a bit on a sandwich. But it works well with the tartness, as you'll see, with the sweetness of the meringue. Yes.
Did you try any other nuts in there before you settled on walnuts?
I did actually use just some mixed, and some pistachios and some mixed nuts.
Because the walnuts absolutely nail it, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Is there like an optimum cooking time? Is there a point where, or is there a minimum? I mean, could you go, right, like now, for example,
yeah.
I'm starving, I want it can go in the fridge, cool down.
You could have this now, and it would thicken up a bit as you cooled it down, but this is still quite, we want this a bit thicker. We want those bubbles to be less in number,
more lazy,
more thick,
more
basically. Exactly. It's still a bit,
get the fucking throw it on the mic.
It's still a bit feisty, but that's a good point. Everyone has their, personal preference to thickness, and that's really why I make my own preserves as well, because, like I said, I like a runnier set. I don't like to sort of destroy the bread if I put it on the toast, But then also the main reason that I like a runnier set is because you can get away with using less sugar. But we did put that lemon in there, which will help it preserve. Then we've got our cooking technique, the heat. So the longer you cook it, but this does have a shorter shelf life. And I should mention as well, we've got some jars which will,
Sterilise them.
Yeah, I sterilised those before I came.
What's interesting at this point? Quantity of duck leg.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm obsessed with duck, and this. I go into a real, I'll be eating duck and making this to go along. But you can see now it's starting to get a bit thicker.
I just think the walnuts are...
To be honest, any dark meat, any game, like going into like that game season, I'm just thinking like Woodstock pheasant.
Yes.
It's the oil from the walnuts just reminds me of, the cooked down fat off the leg. It's got that slightly nutty edge.
Yeah.
That and the walnuts, because you would never think of a walnuts and duck today. I'm 49.
Even, I don't know if you can see that now, but it's just starting to get there. But also, looking at the history of the gooseberry, it's one of those great things that you find it in hedgerows, you find it in a farm or in gardens, and it became really popular in the 19th century. Just sort of, it got a bit competitive. People growing their different varieties of gooseberries, but it is one of those plants that is native to Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa, and so it's the same family. It's a rebus, so it's the same family as your currants, which again we have in season now. I've been doing loads of pickled red currants, and these are great pickled as well.
You find them everywhere, don't you, as well?
Yes.
If you stood where I'm stood now, you can smell that roast pork, and with that smell, that marriage of the two, the
Can I
owners.
go and get some of that roast pork, see if it works for
Yeah,
this?
we'll have a go and have a
Yes.
Yeah, now we can see. Can you see the we're getting a nice glisten to
You get
it.
that wonderful kind of slightly thicky, unctuous
Exactly.
kind of rim where that's the bit which is ready. That's all ready now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of look at that.
And if I take a spoonful up, you can see that under these little gooseberries that are floated to the top, we get a nice thickening underneath. And I'm just stirring it just to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. And
Well, before Mr. Singh comes back, should we have a little taste? Because you've been watching this.
Yeah.
So if anybody would like to come up, I think they can come up.
Yeah.
And then we'll put them at the end.
so I'll tell you what we've got. We've got oat cake with, again, the a little goat's cheese. This is a meringue, just with a bit of this one here that was made earlier. And then this is a little sweet pastry case with a bit of that in there. Ideally, I would put a dollop of cream on the meringues, obviously, but
no, they look absolutely lovely.
look, here we go.
We found some roast pork, that's perfect. So we can kind of create a little bit of an impromptu buffet. So if you do want to come up, have a little taste, have a look what's going on in Emmy's pot.
I do lots of workshops with children, young people, all ages, and what I love is when I've worked with a group of people and the next week they say I took some fruit and I've made my own jam, and you know what's going in it. If you turn your jar around that you might get from the shop, you can see what's in there. A good point is there are loads of artificial pectins, but I prefer to use the lemon.
I mean, do you really want a jar of jam that's going to last 3 years?
No.
You want that? Then don't buy it. Make your own and eat it.
I know we know the usual names, Elizabeth Davis,
Yeah.
Mr. Bees. Is there any which are kind of your hidden gems? Because I think when you've done food history, there's always one where you're like, have you ever read so-and-so?
I really do. I have one that I refer to, and it's called Meals Medicinal, and it's from sort of the 1800s. And there's not even really any specific amounts on there, but it's got. I like to sort of think of myself sometimes as a bit of part witch, part scientist, sort of in my big cauldron. And so I make a lot of cordials, and I'm much. Pardon me. I prefer to. If I've got a cold, I make preserved lemons myself with ginger, and so I'll have that in my tea.
I just have 30 minutes.
Oh look, we've got some here.
This is for us.
And this, thank you.
Right,
How
so
are we looking?
I think we're probably about time to wrap up.
Perfect. So let's put this off the heat.
I think we owe a massive, massive round of applause to Emmy for coming here today and really showing us something we've never had at Jimmy's Farm. Please do come up and have a little taste.
Please do.
I found that fascinating. Do get on the website. My goodness, it's SMYGOOD.
Thank you so much.
NESS.
Yeah, which is a Suffolk. If you ever meet another Smye, they're pretty much from Suffolk. Super Suffolk. But keep in mind this is hot. Yeah, so I'm just
Come
Come and have a smell, and come and have a taste. We've got lots of different things to be tasted, some meringues. Yeah, can we give Emmy another big round of applause? She's Suffolk girl, she's feeding you. And remember, don't forget to go over to Woodford's. Once you've grabbed yourself a little tartlet or meringue.
So there you have it, gooseberries. Thanks again to everyone at Jimmy's Farm, Hardeep and Joe Hurd. You can see images, recipes, all the paintings and people mentioned in the podcast by going to smygoodness.com. The link is on the homepage, or follow me for more on Instagram, Twitter, etc. You can find Joe at joehurd.co.uk, or on Instagram, follow him on Joe Hurd Cook, all one word. You can follow Hardeep on Instagram at Mr. HSK, or you can find out more about Hardeep at socomedy.co.uk. You can follow the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support Smygoodness Podcast further, you can even go to patreon.com/smygoodness and find a range of options and ways to support and get all sorts of exclusive information, access and products. Thanks for listening. Bye!
Have you heard? Mark my words. Smygoodness jam, chutney, jelly and curds. On your toast, or with some cheese. It will simply make you weak at the knees.
Go to the shop on on smartgoodness.com to look at all the seasonal flavours, including the famous 6-pepper jelly.
Come along now, don't be daft. Smart Goodness Workshops, food, arts and crafts.
For more information, go to smartgoodness.com, the workshops page, and find out all the different private, public, and corporate workshops that are on offer. Or to discuss bespoke workshops, email me at info@smartgoodness.com.